So martial arts has always been a part of my life. Wing Chun, Jiu-Jitsu, kickboxing, battles, I train them all. Each one pushed me in a unique way. But boxing felt different because it let me play to my strengths. It demanded split-second decisions, unshakable grit, razor-sharp strategy, and relentless refinement. So a couple years ago, I made the decision. I was going to do this. I was going to go all in, and I started training 4 to 5 times a week. At first, it wasn't smooth sailing. My footwork was pretty rough. My energy management, let's just say I was gassing out halfway through a round. But that's the beauty of boxing. It exposes every weakness, and if you're willing to put in the work, it makes you better. Now at 44, I'm one of the better fighters in the gym. Now on this particular day, I was ready to show it all. My coach said it was going to be hard sparring that day. The first round, everything was clicking. My timing, my movement, it all felt perfect. But what happened next? Let's just say it was a reminder that even when you're at your strongest, life has a way of catching you off guard. It only took one punch. One perfectly placed hook shattered everything I thought I had under control. In that instant, my role flipped, and what came next? That's where the real fight began. Before we started, the coach looks at us and says, "All right, we're going to do some hard sparring today. You know, the kind that where you're not just going through the motions. It's real, it's intense, and I was ready for it." So we touched gloves right out of the gate. Immediately threw a switch stance straight, which completely threw him off. I could see it in his face. He wasn't expecting that at all. And from there, I just went to work. I was landing clean shots, combos, slipping, countering, controlling the ring. It felt like everything was working. I wasn't even tired, not a bit. And then it hit me. All the training that I've been doing, all those hours I put in, was finally paying off big time. Ding ding, the bell rings, 2 minutes is up. And my coach steps in and says, "That was impressive, I'm proud of you." I was hearing that, man, I felt good. I was in the zone. And that was when I looked down at the canvas and I noticed there was blood. I realized my sparring partner was bleeding, probably from that quick uppercut I did earlier that round. I wasn't trying to hurt him, so I figured I'd back off a little bit in the next round. Let him take the lead. And that's when things got interesting. If you're finding this interesting so far, do me a favor and hit that like button. It helps the YouTube algorithm send this video to more people who need to hear about frequency healing. And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on more powerful insights on using frequencies for health and peak performance. Alright, so we're back in for the second round. I decided to back off a little, let him take the lead, see what he's got, what kind of combinations he throws. He starts pressing forward, throwing more punches, becoming more aggressive. I stay calm, I'm slipping, I'm countering, just working with his rhythm. Then he throws this cross hook combination. The cross didn't land cleanly, but bam, out of nowhere the hook comes, and it lands directly in my eye. I mean, it was a clean, solid hit, and the second it connected, I felt this sharp pain go through my skull. It wasn't like the usual sting you get from a punch. This was completely something else, like someone was driving a spike through my eye. I stopped immediately, I wasn't even trying to shake it off. I knew something was completely wrong. And then, as if the pain wasn't enough, my vision was completely off. Double vision kicked in. Everything was overlapping and blurry. I couldn't focus on anything. And then the nausea hits hard. I started feeling lightheaded, and before you knew it, I was in the gym bathroom throwing up. At first I thought this is maybe just adrenaline messing with me, but then I started throwing up blood. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just a tough hit. Something was seriously wrong. The round wasn't even over. I told my coach that I was done. I couldn't see properly, my head was spinning, and the pain was unbearable. There wasn't any pushing through this. I had to figure out what was going on. I sat down trying to put myself together, but the pain wasn't letting up. I noticed my body was going into shock. I started feeling extreme chills. That's when I realized I gotta go home and figure out the next steps. This wasn't something that I could just shake off. So I somehow managed to get in my car. I started driving home. And let me tell you, driving with double vision and nausea is not a good time. I was holding the wheel like my life depended on it, which honestly I kind of did. By the time I got home, things were getting worse. I was shaking uncontrollably, my arms started cramping, I could feel my whole body was going into full-on shutdown mode. I thought, this isn't good. And then I remembered my Qi Coils were right there, so I grabbed them and then turned them on. And immediately the pain subsided. It went from 7 or 8 down to like a 3 or the 4. But then I was still feeling very cold. I felt shivers all over my body. I grabbed my Qi Coils again, and you know what? Within seconds, the shaking actually stopped. It was just like that. I was like, was this really working? So I decided to do a test, and basically I found out whenever I turned it on, my shivering went away. I felt like I was warm inside. It didn't feel like my body was shaking anymore. But then when I turned it off, the shaking and the shivering came back. And I did this a few times over and over just to make sure I wasn't imagining things, but it worked every time. So I was thinking there, is this thing actually pumping energy into my body? I felt like it was giving me something I didn't even know I needed. I still had pain, but at least it was on a manageable level, and I wasn't shaking anymore. But even with the Qi Coils calming things down, the nausea wouldn't stop. My hands were cramping really badly, so I thought something neurological was going on. That's when I realized this wasn't something I could just sleep off. I needed to get to the hospital. So I packed a bag, I grabbed all my warm clothes, snacks, water, and of course my Qi Coils. I wasn't going to leave those behind, and I called 911. Now I was expecting an ambulance, but instead the fire department shows up first. I'm sitting there thinking, unless my eye's about to catch fire, this feels a little bit extra. About 30 minutes later, the ambulance finally rolls in, and by the time I got to the hospital, I was freezing. Luckily, I brought my blanket, I wore my thickest jacket, and layers of clothing. And still I was feeling I was sitting in a freezer. So naturally, I grabbed my Qi Coils again, and almost instantly, I felt warm. Like the chills just disappeared. I know it sounds crazy, but it worked. I kept testing it, turning the frequencies on and off, and every time the warmth came back when they were on. And at that moment, I wasn't questioning it, I just needed something that worked. And if you don't believe it, you think it's placebo or something, we already have several clinical trials you can check out on the website. So you know how it goes with Canadian emergency rooms. If you're not bleeding out, you're waiting. I'm sitting there for 3 hours, holding my eye, thinking, maybe I should just go home. But eventually, hours later, they call me in for a CT scan. After that, I wait another hour. The doctor finally comes in and says, good news, you don't have a concussion. What you do have is an orbital floor fracture. This is a CT scan of the eye, and as you can see, there is a fracture that is right here. So that's called orbital fracture. So these are the eye sockets, and this is a 1 millimeter thin, flexible piece of bone that easy to break. It's kind of like a crumple zone, so that when you do get trauma in the eye or get punched, in this case, then actually it will crumple zone so that the eye will be saved and it won't damage or traumatize the eyeball itself. So here's another diagram of the orbital bones. So the fracture was actually behind the eye around this area, not in the front or the bottom. So what happened was that the nerves around here and the muscles kind of attached together, they got stuck inside of the fracture in the bone, and it prevented the eye from rotating up and down. So what they had to do was to make an incision on the eyelid so that they can poke a device and see if they can loosen up this tissue that was stuck inside of the bone. So apparently this kind of thing is more common with kids with these injuries because their bones are flexible. So now I'm sitting there wondering if my body decided to pull some weird age reversing trick on me. But of course they don't just let me leave after the diagnosis. Nope, it's time for a full ER experience. Blood pressure checks, blood tests, vision exams. They took my blood pressure at least 10 times that I was going to explode or something. The eye test, no problems. Reading the letters on the wall, I crushed it. Even though I was punched in the eye, my lens, my retina, those were fine. So at least that was working okay. But you know, the ER isn't just something physically exhausting. It's mentally and emotionally draining too. While I was sitting there in the waiting room, they brought in someone who had a stroke in a stretcher. A little later while, I saw her family come in one by one, crying. And I could tell she didn't make it. That hit me hard. Suddenly, the pain in my eye felt very small, because it's in moments like this where you realize how fragile life is, and how lucky you are to be even sitting there with a chance to heal. Anyway, they told me I had to stay at the hospital overnight so that they could monitor me, make sure nothing goes wrong. And the next day, the surgeon comes in and does another check on my eyes. And basically what he says that there's no emergency anymore. So I had a choice to either get surgery immediately to release the nerve and the tissues that were stuck inside my orbital fracture, or I can see if there's any improvement with the eye over the next few days. So fast forward a few weeks, I do a lot of therapy, the swelling goes away, the pain goes away, but there's still this double vision problem. My left eye was not moving up and down. It could move left and right, so you can look left and right, but it could not move up and down. So whenever I just tilt my head slightly, I was have double vision. And whenever I used both eyes, I would be dizzy. I couldn't even walk without feeling completely nauseous. So I did eye exercises and everything, but the improvement was way too slow. I was improving about, let's say, 1% a day. Then another doctor suggested I do get the surgery because not fixing the alignment of the eyes may actually affect the good eye too. So in order to prevent that, I said, okay, fine. let's do the surgery and help it heal faster. So luckily they were able to make an incision behind the eyelid so that there was no external scar that's visible. Here's another image showing you what the orbital bone looks like. So basically it's this area here, and these are all flexible bones, and apparently in children they're more flexible than adults. But luckily it actually flexed, opened up, and then flexed back into a perfect position. Unfortunately, because of the flexing, the tissues did get stuck inside of the crack that closed back up. And honestly, I was just a bit nervous, but not really that nervous. At that point, I was really just curious how quickly things could bounce back. So I go through the surgery. All I remember was just walking in the room, lying down on the bed, getting myself positioned. They put in the anesthetics and they tell me to breathe 4 times. All I remember was breathing the 3rd time and then waking up. So those anesthetics really work well. So I woke up from the surgery not really knowing what to expect. I mean, they just worked inside of my face, right? But what I noticed was nothing. There was no pain, 0. The nurse hands me painkillers and I just said, no thanks, I don't need them. And they looked at me like I was some kind of medical miracle. One thing that I did do was I remember when I was in surgery, I did keep the calm frequency playing through my phone. So maybe that helped the surgeons perform the surgery much better, right? You want a calm surgeon, you don't want someone that's not calm. Plus it may have had effect on the inflammation and this bleeding or the swelling and the pain that usually comes with the surgery. Now don't get me wrong, there was no pain, but the swelling was no joke at first. My eye looked rough, like it was been through a prize fight, like I just got punched by Mike Tyson in his prime days with no gloves. But I had my secret weapons, the Qi Coils, the Qi light panels, and Qi tones. I wasn't leaving my recovery to chance. So day 1, it was completely swollen. Here's day 2, still not that great. But by day 4, you can see the swelling has mostly gone. They told me it would take 3 months for the swelling to go down. But with everything I was doing, I sped that up big time. I wasn't back to normal yet. I still had double vision, but I wasn't in pain and I could function just fine. At that point, I considered it a win. Now, let me just say this. I'm not claiming Qi Coils are magic, but without them, I would have been dealing with way more pain and much slower recovery. I doubt I'll be sitting here talking to you this soon. Before surgery, I couldn't even sit at my desk more than an hour or 2. My eye fatigue was brutal. And for someone who runs their own business, that's a problem. I run Qi Life. It's a company focused on wellness technology, energy healing, and personal transformation. We help people raise their vibration and improve their health using the same tools I used during my recovery. But here's the thing. Even as the founder, I wasn't immune to the stress and strain of running a business while dealing with an injury. This whole experience forced me to step back, and I started asking myself, if something like this would ever happen again, would my business survive without me? And that's when I realized I needed to automate more and trust my team to handle the day-to-day operations. So I leaned on my team, I delegated more, and I focused on building systems we were already built. And you know what's funny? By stepping back, things actually improved. Sales were steady, systems worked, my team stepped up in ways I didn't even expect. So if you're running your own business, here's my advice. Learn to let go. Trust your people, build systems, and sometimes letting go is the best way to grow. Now here's the part that nobody talks about, the mental side of recovery. After 2 days after the surgery, I started feeling this overwhelming anxiety. Thoughts started going through my head, like what if my vision never healed? What if this was my new normal? I couldn't stop thinking about it. The more I thought about it, the worse it got. Maybe the physical shock of the surgery affected my emotions. So I sit there, staring into space, imagining the worst case scenario, double vision forever. Eye strain every day. It was heavy. And that's when I turned to what I know works. I set up my Qi Coils and loaded up quantum mood, luck boost frequencies. And you know what? Within minutes, I felt lighter. The weight wasn't gone completely, but I didn't feel as suffocating anymore. And then my wife said something to me that really hit me. She looked at me and said, "Look at how much you healed already." That was the perspective I needed. I wasn't stuck, I was improving. Actually, I was healing at an incredible rate. But sometimes when you're in it, all you see is what's wrong. But when I stopped and looked back, the progress was undeniable. I wasn't just healing physically, I was getting my mindset back on track too. Now here's the funny part. The doctors told me no boxing for 3 weeks, no exercise. I nodded and said, And then about a week later, I'm back at it. But wait, it's not what you think. I started VR boxing. So at least I don't get hit in the face. And if I lose, I only hurt my ego. I strap on the headset, start dodging virtual punches in my living room and my garage. And honestly, it felt great. The movement actually helped me train my eye. It's like my brain and my vision was rewiring themselves every time I trained. So the doctors said it could take up to 6 months for my vision to fully recover. But here's the thing, I'm already seeing improvement of 5% a day. And now, just 2 weeks after surgery, I could say I have 50% improvement. So VR boxing became my rehab. It wasn't conventional, but it worked. And honestly, I'll take whatever gets me back into the game faster. If you made it this far, thanks for sticking around. I honestly believe that I wouldn't have healed this fast without the tools I used. Qi Coil's PEMF therapy, Qi light red light therapy, Qi tones sound therapy, Qigong meditation. So everything else that's part of my daily journey. Have you ever had an experience like this before? Or are you curious about the frequencies and how they work? Then drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your story and to share more about what worked for me. And if you want to see what these tools can do for you, make sure you check my profile. Sometimes the best healing doesn't come from pills, it comes from unexpected places. Until next time, stay strong, stay healthy, use the Qi, and prosper.